Hey, I'm Christopher Schroeder. I'm chairman of the board of GMF, and I'm pleased to join in the latest in its Transatlantic AI conversations. GMF is committed to diving into the most significant shifts in policy, politics, business, and tech, and how they are changing dynamics in America, Europe, and beyond. GMF has gathered some of the leading actors across the rapidly changing worlds of AI and technology, and I urge you to visit each discussion on our website or on our YouTube channel. Now, today, we're particularly lucky to have with us Juliane Gallina, Deputy Director of Digital Innovation at the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. This is a rare and important opportunity to help us to understand how leaders in the front line of these changes assess both the opportunities and challenges without precedent. So, Juliane, I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for making time for me and creating some space for our agency so that we can be heard. We really appreciate it.
And we're very honored that you want to be heard, and that I think that's in a way a perfect place to start, because I think a lot of the audience, even those very familiar with security, think of the CIA as something of a black box, and they've seen too many movies or books or whatever. And I wonder if you can right-set us just a bit on how tech innovation is managed in a big building like this, both in terms of sort of learning, adoption of what's coming, but also in daily application.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked the question with that preamble about us being a black box in the past, because it's absolutely true. And I think some people have observed that our current director, Bill Burns, has taken a different tack. And I think this is based on a belief that in order for us to gain the trust of the American people, industry, and also our partners across the globe, we really need to explain who we are and maybe like open the kimono a little bit. So I'm really glad to be here. So you asked about how we use technology, what the role of it is in our work at the CIA. And I think I need to kind of start with the broad brush of just some basic functions. Our agency is broken up into 5 directorates, and these align to some of the core functions that we perform. And I'll start with the one that's probably the most famous, and that's the Directorate of Operations, where officers do human intelligence. And of course, we have the Directorate of Analysis, which does the formulation of analysis that supports policymakers downtown. And then we have the Directorate of Support, the Directorate of Science and Technology, and then my directorate, the Directorate of Digital Innovation. And our directorate focuses on everything in the digital domain. It was created in 2015 when the whole of the agency was reorganized and modernized. And we created it to aggregate digital skills in one directorate. But Chris, this is the information age, of course. And the modernization of the agency, I think, was a prescient move by my predecessors, because when they did that, they were anticipating that in order to really be successful in the information age, we have to pair our human operators and our analysts with people with digital skills, people who understand data, AI, cyber, both cybersecurity, cyber operations, open source intelligence. That's the intelligence that we glean from commercial and publicly available data. I could go on, but you kind of get the sense that the idea here was to have a professional core of officers who could be side by side with operators and analysts to help the CIA do its work in blended operations. And that's what makes this job so much fun.
What's interesting, you sort of touched on this parenthetically, and I bet you security institutions around the world navigate this. You have this massive change that's happening. The opportunity for you to do your job better than ever is sort of without precedent. And then you've got these very real security challenges. And I'm just sort of wondering, how do you navigate that balance between, in a way, wanting to be the most tech-forward institution in government, and at the same time, you there probably have the biggest target on you. And how do you navigate it?
It's funny that you use the word target, because I really, I'm going to be a straight Gen Xer and claim my generation with a full heart. Any Gen Xers listening or watching would recall Gary Larson's cartoons in The Far Side. And there was this just famous one, was a single frame cartoon. 2 deer meet each other in the woods, and they're standing erect like people. And one deer facing the cartoon frame has this gigantic bullseye on his chest. And the caption of this cartoon says, "Bummer birthmark hell." And And yet, when I came back into the agency after being a decade away and coming back in as the CIO of the agency, I felt like that deer with the target on its belly, because we obviously have. If you were an adversary, you would want to get into our networks. You would be trying. So absolutely, we are a prized target, and we're conscious of it. So this changes our stance, changes the way we think about our work. So like any gigantic enterprise with thousands of people and a global operation, we have all the same systems that any enterprise would have: applications, data, cloud compute, and we have to protect those things. So that's kind of the enterprise function. I think this means we have to really be at the top of our game for cyber defense. In this case, we really had the wind at our back with the current administration, who has established a new executive order and moved some resources our way to help us improve our cyber defense. All of that has been good. But anyone who works in the intelligence community, who also works in cyber, if they give you the sense that they're comfortable when it comes to the threat, that they're making it up. There's no way to be comfortable in this. We know that the adversaries are coming after us. I think the other important thing to point out is it's not just our enterprise functions that need to be protected. Our agency does what every other enterprise does in terms of communicating with one another, communicating with partners, collaborating, and we need the tools to do collaboration. We also need the tools to do our core functions in our operations. And the thing that makes us different from an industry partner would be that we have to do this clandestinely. And so we have to operate globally with a deployed workforce. We work with allies. We work with US industry. All of those things mean we're out in the world using technologies that are common and commonplace, but we have to operate them in a way that makes it unseen, or at least blending in the noise, so to speak. And this means that we have to apply a slightly different tradecraft as we try to develop the capabilities and deploy capabilities that anyone would use in any company.
You've referenced a couple of times the importance of allies in this. It would seem to me that as technology, by definition, and perhaps AI more than ever, is borderless, I assume that connection with allies and sharing of intelligence, but also learning how to engage with allies, is an always evolving framework. And I'm just wondering, what have you learned? What is most effective to not only keep pace here, but to keep pace, with the allies that can help you in your mission so powerfully?
So this is, this may seem like maybe a sappy answer, but trust. Trust is probably the most fundamental thing. Our officers in human operations, in particular, that Directorate of Operations, will say that they're really all about human relationships. And so as the Directorate of Digital Innovation, bringing the digital skills and the digital capabilities to that directorate, what we're doing is following in their tradition of building partnerships and really building trust through open communications and sharing. Now, I think the thing that I've learned over the past few years being back at the agency is that when it comes to partnership, it's okay to, let's say, exchange data, because you don't necessarily need to have your systems touch one another. I think that the real test of trust is when you have actual connectivity. And for me, as a technical person who's trying to help our agency succeed and sees competitive advantage over adversaries, having enough trust to be able to connect and do things at speed and scale with partners is the real true test. And I find that really mission problems are the catalyst that accelerate our partnerships, because our partners, when we have a shared interest and a shared mutual challenge, problem solving kicks in, teamwork kicks in, and partnership grows.
So it's very interesting because you mentioned also, right, you have the allies, but there are adversaries and people who are always figuring out what exactly they are in the grand scheme of things overall. And what's been interesting to me in my lens, both from the private sector, but thinking of it a little bit on the policy side, is that in America, as certainly Silicon Valley likes to think, that the story of AI is an American story. But I think much has to be understood, and maybe for actually the first time in history. I'm not sure if any time in history we've had to look at places like China, obviously, as being a co-leader in a way on how the rules of the game are being set. But it's actually surprisingly much more than that. I mean, India is not stepping back. The Gulf is playing a significant role and plans to play a significant role. But no one is standing still. And I'm wondering, how has that sort of development, which in a way really is a first time, changed the way that we need to assess who our adversaries are, who are our friends?
I think it's a fascinating time. We know that Xi Jinping, Putin, both of them have publicly said that mastering artificial intelligence is critical to their national security strategy and in fact, their national strategy. Each of them has said that leading in AI will help them. I'm going to just make my American ears here, rule the world. It sounds almost comical, but it has prompted us at our agency to pivot and make technology itself the subject of intelligence. And in the past, our agency has always been good at making technology the subject of intelligence when it pertains to adversary weapon systems. So it's kind of a classic example to look back to the Cold War and understand that the intelligence community became experts in understanding through all kinds of observable phenomenon the progress that the Soviets were making on nuclear weapons. And so you need people who really understand nuclear technology, weapons technology. They were technologists, but also analysts, and they were experts at that. So it's kind of a classic example to show how we've always focused on technology to some extent. What's different today is that artificial intelligence poses so much promise and peril in a global competition that we have to look at that as the subject of intelligence itself, to understand how other nations are harnessing this technology, what they intend to do with it, how they're using it and applying it, and not just in the practice of intelligence or warfare, but also to gain economic advantage, to drive their partnerships with other countries, and even I'd mention to secure access to resources to power the compute that one will need to make these generative AI models work. And that's, I think, a fascinating frontier for analysts who are studying this space.
We actually had one of the previous people who spoke with us, this amazing woman from France, actually in the defense area. And she had quoted a Russian general who apparently said, and it was leaked, that, when he was a young man, 80% of war was violence, and 20% of it was information and propaganda. And he said, today it's the reverse. And that is, of course, anything in information war is only going to be compounded by AI and opens up conversations. And so people, I think, reflecting creatively and expansively the way that you've described is absolutely essential in this world. And another element of that expansion is there's another key constituency for you, I think. And this is, I think, a lot of what your previous experience has been so leverageable in, and it is very much a part of your mandate now, which is the private sector. And it's important because obviously the private sector is leading the charge on the innovation itself. It's obviously doing many of the things which are expansive globally overall, but they can't do what they do well, I would argue, without being close and understanding the needs that you understand so well. And I have suggested that what you do well is only beneficial by having, good understanding conversation. Can you talk a little bit about how there is that kind of interconnectivity with the private sector? Is that different now than it's been before?
Yeah, I think it has. And I can give you some great examples, but I'll start with the way back because I think it speaks to our roots and the way we used to do it. During the 60s, of course, there's this well-known, just huge acceleration in the space industry, and everyone was, most people in the public were focused on the space race toward the moon. But at the same time, that was in the backdrop of the Cold War, and what most Americans probably didn't realize was the intimate partnership between aerospace and defense companies and the U.S. government to get access to denied territories and to develop the remote sensing capabilities and telecommunications capabilities that could help us see into the Soviet Union to understand where exactly the Russians were with nuclear weapons. And I think that that partnership at the time was such a remarkable partnership where both parties had to accept risk and both parties had to invest to get the breakthroughs that we're benefiting from today. Everything from GPS, global telecommunications, much of that we can look to roots that happened during that period of time. So I'm going to give you what might feel like a more pedestrian example that's more recent, but kind of speaks to the kind of partnerships that we've been able to create more recently. So around 2011, 2012, my predecessors at the CIA were watching and observing the advent of cloud compute. And it occurred to them that we were going to be left behind if we just kept doing what we had been doing to do all of our compute on premise behind firewalls and completely separate. Like we knew we had to change and take advantage of this new technology. So I say this may sound passé because today we take cloud computing for granted and it's just part of everyday life. But at the time, this was really quite earth-shattering. And so we created this contract called C2S, which was a partnership with a leading cloud service provider. And at the time, I was in industry and I was hearing about this when the contract started in 2013. And I heard about it very soon after the contract was awarded. I was hearing that, oh, it's going so well. And I really couldn't believe it. I mean, honestly, I'm just telling you as an industry person that can't be. It just can't be. So when I come back into the agency and had an opportunity to peek under the hood and see how things were going, I have to say it really exceeded my expectations because the cloud service provider, much like in the days of the space race, saw the necessity of doing this work, recognized the government marketplace as a legitimate marketplace and decided to make that investment, which is really important. But they had to accept risk because there was no guarantee that would pay off for them. For our part, it was a significant investment for us with no guarantee that it would be secure enough for us to use. And so that required a huge cultural shift on our part, some investment in partnership with them to really figure out how are we going to do this in a secure way. And I think what happened was we made that cloud service provider's security capabilities in the cloud better. They were open in that part, learning from us and adapting their core technology, which has rippled through and trickled out into commercial cloud computing writ large. And I think that trend has continued to play out. So the epilogue on that story is that we now have the C2E contract cloud compute enterprise, which is a multi-cloud award, and we're working with 5 major cloud service providers. And I'm seeing in different ways that this partnership continues with U.S. industry, and each of those cloud service providers is showing up slightly differently, which is really cool because they're beginning to differentiate and bring us a different perspective that really links back to their skills and strengths in the U.S. marketplace. And it's helping our agency and our community really keep pace with the changes in technology. One last thought on that I think just makes this really important to us, a contract like that, which again might sound kind of pedestrian to some of your listeners. We don't have those investments, which started in 2013. We wouldn't be where we are today with generative AI and more traditional machine learning approaches because we can't harness the massive amounts of disparate data, the large volumes of data. We simply can't be a modern intelligence agency without cloud computing. It's the foundational platform upon which we can really seize advantage digitally.
They're very powerful learnings, and I must confess as an outsider, it was equally surprising to me how successful this has been. So on the procurement side is obviously very important, but it seems to me, but blow a hole in the premise, that in particularly with a rapidly changing capability like AI, there'll be opportunities, I have no doubt, from wherever. But there's also like shared learning, like really understanding How do you feel? Is the private sector doing a good job at being a partner, not just in terms of selling service, but sort of bringing you under their kimono to let you see and understand things that might be, in fact, helpful in a co-authorship over time?
Oh my gosh, Chris, that's a great question. And yes, I think one of the things that has been delightful coming back to the agency of being a leader here is when having an opportunity to access U.S. industry and a huge dynamic range, everything from a small startup that has never worked with the intelligence community before, all the way to a big tech company or a traditional aerospace and defense company, a federal system integrator, and everything in between. Even some small companies that have grown up in national security and really are fit to purpose just for us. The kinds of innovations that they bring every day are remarkable. But what I love is that when I ask a question of U.S. industry counterparts, for example, I've recently asked a cloud service provider, can you show me what are you seeing in banking and finance? What are you seeing in insurance? How should we be learning about the very best of technology and digital transformation in those industries? Can you help me learn from that? Not only have they done it, they've brought in experts. They've helped me make those contacts. They've had us sit side saddle with them for over a day at a time to help us really get under the hood with some of those experts from those industries so that we can really stay abreast of those changes and begin to bring that into our agency. So yes, I think it's pretty remarkable. And I'd say I think the tone has shifted. U.S. industry has always been interested in, and the industries of our Western allies or all allies, they've always been interested in doing business with us. But what I find different recently is this sense of shared ownership and a desire to protect our values and protect our equities as a nation and those of our allies. That's really felt like a palpable shift over the past 5 years.
I just would need to double click on it because I couldn't agree with it more. And I think what you've done in terms of the openness to be innovative and procurement is essential. But this shared learning and the almost open door that you've just talked about the reciprocity of learning, I think a lot of people in business in particular, but I'm sure there are other people in government, and I know there are people in government and business in Europe, for example, who they just think they're separate worlds, and they don't fully appreciate the opportunity of this. And I do think, particularly in this time of history, there are lots of women and men across the spectrum who just want to be helpful in any way they can. So it's really powerful that you share that with us, and thank you. Just a couple more questions because I want to be sensitive to your time with your stay in an industry. At one level, what's essential is talent. The talent is essential to any company, but having the right talent in a great place like your areas is enormous. And of course, your mission alone is one of the great recruiting tools. People who come to you for a very particular reason that can't be replicated by anyone. And yet at the same time, there's always greatest talent is getting sucked up by lots of expensive deals and everything else across the private sector. As you think about the future, particularly of tech acquisition of talent going forward, how should any big organization that's in the sort of the public service or national security world be thinking about how to think about really getting the best talent they can for the very issues you described so well?
Yeah, I think you said it. It's the mission. I've always thought that the best possible job on the planet would have a balance of amazing technology, incredible people, and a mission that's worthwhile, something that helps people feel connected to something bigger than themselves. And I can say with authority, because I've been in industry and small companies and large company, you can get that in industry. That you don't have to be in the government to feel a sense of mission, to feel like you're solving hard problems. I mean, this is it's everywhere. But I will say that what drew me back to the CIA was the unique way that we blend those three ingredients. And I think it's really important for people to have an opportunity to come back and serve. There's something very gratifying about that. Being part of tremendous missions that get accomplished. You can't talk about it publicly, but when you see something on the front page of the paper and you had a part in pulling off the success, even if it was as simple as providing the cloud computing or the communications that supported an operation, it's very gratifying. I also think it's lifestyle. When someone serves at the CIA, they're welcomed into a family of people who share values and are really serious about problem solving. So I always think it's really important for me to point our teams in my directorate toward the right problems, because they're so good at problem solving that if you point them at the wrong problem, it might get crushed to dust and just expended very precious resources on something that maybe you could have had them solving something bigger. So I feel like my part of my job is always elevating people to focus on the bigger problems that need to get solved. And the lifestyle extends to the fact that we're a global operation. So there are career opportunities to travel overseas, serve either temporarily or permanently overseas, and sometimes careers here that are 100% here in the United States are also combined with operators or analysts in a way that make it really gratifying.
Well, just a couple of more, if I could. Juliane, I think that people are going to be surprised by many things that you said. There's something that even surprised me, and I followed a little bit, which is that you all are in charge of leading the open source intelligence for the intelligence community. And I think at one level, people do not think about intelligence community and open source in the same sentence. And I'm so curious, could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Oh my gosh, it's such a great aspect of our mission. I mentioned earlier that the CIA is the responsible organization in the intelligence community for human intelligence or HUMINT, but we're also the responsible organization or the executive agent for open source intelligence in the community. And open source intelligence, I'll start with the definition, is intelligence that's derived from publicly available or commercially available data. A couple of things I want to say about this. So, like anything in intelligence, this is a team sport. And so I find that one of the most amazing things about being at the center of this open source community is observing my colleague, Randy Nixon, who is the chief of the open source enterprise, work laterally across the intelligence community, 17 organizations, bring them together to maximize innovation, to share the data that we've gleaned, to innovate in the technology space. The technology space in open source is really, really important because unlike some of the other sources of intelligence that we gather together at the CIA, where we have to protect our sources and methods because they're exquisite, precious, or fragile. With open source, because it's inherently unclassified, we can do a lot of our work on the open internet. And in fact, we have to. But it means that we can also apply tools and technologies that we haven't had to think as hard about with regard to security and counterintelligence measures. So this has become just an amazing sandbox for us to try out new technologies, especially around generative AI. It's been fantastic. So I really give a lot of credit to Randy and his team because they've been pioneers in certain applications of artificial intelligence, and they're making huge strides. And the last thing I'll mention about this, which might also surprise your audience, but be heartening, is that open source intelligence is also a great area for us to establish those partnerships with our liaison partners, our allies, because this is an area where it's very easy to share. It's very easy to problem solve. And sometimes the access to the data, commercial or publicly available, is slightly different depending on where you live in the world. And this has been really fruitful for us.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things in these discussions that we often try to get people to think about is, of course, from whatever constituency, we have private sector people speaking, different forms of government, legislative, and there is almost, particularly I think among policymakers, a gravitation to what could go wrong. And one of the things that I'm excited in this conversation is you really unpack some of the positive things. We know that a lot can go wrong, but I really like to hear what excites you most right now in this technology as you really reflect on it. You've been a part of it and you've worn many hats. Mm-hmm. What has gotten you most interested and intrigued by where this technology may take us?
Artificial intelligence in particular?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's twofold, Chris. On one hand, I think, well, I'm going to kind of get a little maybe nerdy on you, but which I don't think you'll mind. But I have worked with artificial intelligence technology since 2010, and at the time I felt like we were just really trying to explain what artificial intelligence was, teach people about machine learning. That was a battle because you couldn't really quite get to the work because I felt like we were teaching. Things have changed in that respect. So people who in the past would have felt very apprehensive about AI technologies replacing them, I think because it's available, on every mobile phone, every search engine is introducing it, it's very intuitive. And so people, the end users who we had to convince in the past as technologists, say like, look, this technology is going to be great. You need to use it. But then we get stuck grooming data, training data, building models, deploying models, fixing models. All of that was really hard. With generative AI, it's so intuitive and people have already seen it in the commercial marketplace, changing their lives really with consumer products, changing their lives and transforming the way they do work. For me, as a technology leader in my agency, it's changed the openness to it. And I also think it's changed the way we as developers, designers, deployers of this technology get to work with our partners in mission, because it's very easy to innovate with these technologies, with these models, because you can do a lot of very intuitive interaction with GAI in a way that, especially LLMs, and even diffusion engines that help you work with image technology and generate new images. We're finding that it's just so intriguing to people. It's sticky just all by itself. Then when you wrap it with some of their domain knowledge about their tradecraft, how they do their jobs, you pair it with a data scientist and a software developer, and then all of a sudden you've got some magic happening, because it's so much easier to deploy and build with this technology than in the past. So I love that about it, and that makes me very excited because I want to solve hard problems, but you need the buy-in of your end users and their openness. That's transformed. The other thing that this is kind of the more a boring answer, but it's important to us as enterprise leaders. Artificial intelligence, now we're beginning to see where we can draft off the commercial marketplace in areas that are kind of back office. How we can streamline operations, everything from finance, travel, pay and accounting, human resources, all of these kinds of disciplines are going to go faster. And we anticipate the ability to sort of reduce our labor in this area or make our labor more effective and be better. So I think that there's a lot of transformational opportunities there as well.
That's fantastic. We ask everyone at the end of these conversations, if you just happen to recommend, is there anything you're reading that you really has inspired you to think about some of these issues? Is there any blog that you read or a video you've seen? Folks love that. So
yeah,
I'll post what it is.
I love that question, and I will share a few. The Langley Files is a podcast that's sponsored by our agency. Yeah. The Chief Information Security Officer, Jennifer Link, is the most recent episode, and she kind of gives sort of a 101 for the layperson on how to protect oneself out in the wild. So I think that's worth a listen. And all of the Langley podcasts, especially the Director of Operations was interviewed. That's kind of a remarkable interview and a great insight into the ways that we apply our values in the practice of human intelligence. And I just have tremendous admiration for Tom and would really recommend that. Commercial podcasts that I find myself kind of addicted to. There's one called Risky Biz. And this is a cyber podcast that focuses not only on defense trends, but also what's happening in the world of the hackers. And I find a lot of news, and it's interesting to hear what they say about U.S. national security practices in cyber. And they've had a few guests from our agency show up. So for people who are fans of the CIA, you might want to pay attention to that one. And then on a more serious note, there are a few books I'd recommend. I think my boss wrote a memoir. I don't think I know. He wrote a memoir called The Back Channel, which details his career in State Department. And I think it gives you great insight into the way he has brought his perspective on how one partners with other people in other countries, whether they're allies or not, to get things done. And we've seen him really.
This is Bill Burns, by the way.
Bill Burns. Yeah. He's just a remarkable leader. So I strongly recommend that book. So that's all my fangirl stuff about the CIA. And on a much more serious note, I'll tell you, I finished a biography by Eric Metaxas called Bonhoeffer, which is about a Lutheran pastor who died in the Second World War, was killed by the Nazis. And I read it because I had been raised hearing his name, and I never really understood his role in war. And what I find so instructive and inspirational about this story, all true, is that he was living in very troubled times, never gave up hope, never relinquished his core values, and led others to be more resolute. And I think it's also inspiring to me to read about how he came to the United States before the Second World War and learned from African-American leaders about civil rights in the United States and problems that we were having. I think he was very clear-eyed about the challenges we were having in the United States, but he recognized that in a democracy, one has an opportunity to continue to expand definitions of freedom and work on it. He never gave up. And it's just such an inspiring story. So anyone who enjoys history, I think it teaches us not only those lessons on how not to give up on our values, but also to know that the world has been confusing before. And if we just really stick to our values and use our ingenuity, we have all the tools and resources, we can endure and survive. And maybe.
What a fantastic way to end. This may be my favorite ending of any interview I've had. There's no gift a person can give that's more important and valuable than their time. And you've given us not only tremendous time, but amazing insight. But we salute you for your service and feel very fortunate that you're there. And I just want to thank you on behalf of GMF.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.